Rodrigo Vega strutted through the gleaming kitchen of Culinary Champions, the newest cooking competition show taking cable television by storm. As executive producer and self-proclaimed culinary genius, Rodrigo enjoyed the power he wielded over the 12 contestants who had made it to the second week of filming. The show's premise was simple but ruthless: assign increasingly difficult recipes to contestants and eliminate those who failed to impress the judges. This morning, Rodrigo was particularly smug. The network executives were breathing down his neck for higher ratings, which meant he needed to create drama. And nothing created better television than watching contestants struggle and fail spectacularly. "Good morning, chefs," he announced, clapping his hands for attention. The contestants, still bleary-eyed from the previous day's 8-hour challenge, formed a semicircle around him. "Today's challenge will test your technical skills to the absolute limit." He paced dramatically, his polished Italian shoes clicking against the floor tiles. "I've selected specific challenges for each of you based on what I believe are your weaknesses." The contestants exchanged nervous glances. Among them stood Isadora Matsuda, a quiet woman in her mid-40s who had barely scraped through the first week's challenge. With her unassuming demeanor and simple attire, just basic chef whites without the embellishments some others wore, she had flown under everyone's radar. The judges had called her first dish competent but uninspired, and Rodrigo had mentally categorized her as early elimination fodder. "Isadora," Rodrigo said with barely concealed condescension, "you'll be preparing coulibiac de saumon with hand-laminated pastry, accompanied by a traditional sauce beauharnais. You have 3 hours." A hushed murmur spread through the group. The dish was notoriously complex, a Russian-French fusion featuring salmon encased in rice, mushrooms, hard-boiled eggs, and dill, all wrapped in puff pastry that took skilled pastry chefs hours to perfect. The sauce alone required precise technique and timing. "Is there a problem?" Rodrigo asked with a smirk, noticing Isadora's raised eyebrows. "No problem at all," she replied softly, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. What Rodrigo didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Isadora Matsuda had spent 20 years as head chef at Lumière in Paris, where she had earned and maintained 3 Michelin stars for over a decade. She had trained under the legendary chef Dominique Vernier, mastering French cuisine with a perfectionist's dedication. 5 years ago, she had stepped away from the spotlight, exhausted by the pressure and seeking a quieter life. After her father's recent passing, she had entered the competition on a whim, using her mother's maiden name to avoid recognition. As the other contestants received their assignments, most far simpler than hers, Isadora quietly began gathering her ingredients. The show's sous chefs, who assisted with prep work, observed with curiosity as she confidently selected specific herbs and inspected the salmon with an expert's eye. Across the kitchen, Rodrigo was engaged in an interview with the production crew. "I've given Isadora an impossible task," he told the camera with a self-satisfied grin. "The pastry alone would challenge a veteran chef, and her knife skills last week were mediocre at best. This dish separates the amateurs from the professionals." Little did he know that the unassuming woman now carefully measuring ingredients had once been nicknamed the Surgeon for her impeccable knife work and precision. As the clock started and the kitchen erupted into frantic activity, Isadora moved with a tranquil efficiency that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Her hands worked almost independently of conscious thought, muscle memory guiding her through techniques she had performed thousands of times. The cameraman initially assigned to follow more flamboyant contestants found himself increasingly drawn to Isadora's workstation, captivated by her methodical approach and the growing beauty of her creation. By the halfway point of the challenge, most contestants were sweating profusely, racing against time to complete their dishes. Pans clattered, voices raised in frustration, and at least 2 participants were visibly on the verge of tears. But at Isadora's station, an atmosphere of calm prevailed. Rodrigo, making his rounds to check on the contestants' progress and stir up drama for the cameras, stopped short when he reached Isadora's workstation. Her puff pastry dough was resting in the refrigerator, already folded and turned with mathematical precision. The salmon had been expertly filleted, the mushroom duxelles was cooling, and she was carefully peeling perfectly hard-boiled eggs. How are you so far ahead?" he stammered, genuinely confused. Isadora looked up briefly. "I've made this a few times before," she said simply, returning to her task. Lavinia Morton, the show's culinary producer who actually possessed genuine cooking credentials unlike Rodrigo, watched from a distance with growing suspicion. Something about Isadora's technique seemed strangely familiar. The distinctive way she held her knife, the economy of movement, the absence of wasted effort. It reminded her of someone. "Rodrigo," she whispered, pulling him aside. "Do you have any idea who that woman might be?" "Just another home cook who's about to crash and burn," he replied dismissively. Lavinia shook her head. "I don't think so. The way she handles that pastry, I've only seen that technique used in high-end French kitchens." As the final hour approached, Isadora began the assembly process. Her hands moved with graceful precision as she layered the components, the pastry responding to her touch as if it were alive. Other contestants stole glances at her work, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. Montague "Monty" Blackwell, a boisterous former football player turned home chef who had been the frontrunner, abandoned his own dish momentarily to watch Isadora crimp the edges of her pastry with a technique that transformed the functional step into an art form. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, genuinely impressed. Isadora smiled enigmatically. "My previous job required attention to detail." As she placed her completed Kulibiak into the oven, the production assistant responsible for timing called out, "1 hour remaining." While her dish baked, Isadora began preparing the sauce Beauharnais with the same unhurried confidence. The delicate emulsion came together perfectly under her care, the balance of tarragon, shallots, and butter creating a fragrant cloud that drew attention from across the kitchen. Lavinia couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. She approached Isadora's station under the pretense of checking her progress. "That's a professional's technique," she observed quietly. Isadora met her gaze with a slight nod. "I worked in restaurants for a while." "Which ones?" Lavinia pressed. Before Isadora could answer, the timer on her oven beeped. With practiced movements, she retrieved her perfectly golden Kulibiak, the pastry risen into magnificent layers, not a single crack or leak to be seen. As she set it down to rest, a hushed silence fell over the nearest contestants. Even the camera operators seemed transfixed by the sheer perfection of the dish. Rodrigo, noticing the unusual quiet in that corner of the kitchen, hurried over. His confident smirk faltered as he took in Isadora's creation. It wasn't just good. It was magazine-worthy, the kind of dish that appeared on the covers of culinary publications. "Time's up in 15 minutes, the production assistant called out, sending most contestants into a panicked frenzy. But Isadora calmly began plating, her movements deliberate and precise. She sliced through the Kulibiak with a single, clean cut, revealing perfect layers of salmon, rice, mushrooms, and egg, steam rising gently from the center. As she artfully arranged the slice on a warmed plate and sauced it with practiced flicks of her wrist, Lavinia gasped softly. "Mon Dieu," she whispered. "You're Isadora LeBlanc, aren't you?" The revelation hit Rodrigo like a bucket of ice water. Isadora LeBlanc, the Isadora LeBlanc from Lumiere? Isadora neither confirmed nor denied her identity as she continued plating her dish with meticulous attention. The other contestants, catching snippets of the conversation, exchanged confused glances. "Who's Isadora LeBlanc?" whispered Valencia Ortiz, a talented home cook from Arizona, to Monty. "No idea," he replied, though something about the name tugged at his memory. Lavinia, meanwhile, had pulled out her phone and was frantically searching. When she found what she was looking for, she showed the screen to Rodrigo. There it was, a 5-year-old article from Cuisine Internationale featuring a slightly younger Isadora receiving her 3rd Michelin star, the highest honor in the culinary world. You put a 3-star Michelin chef on a reality cooking show and gave her Calibiac de Saumon? Lavinia hissed incredulously. Her signature dish at Lumiere was a modern interpretation of Calibiac that got rave reviews from every major food critic in Europe. The color drained from Rodrigo's face. His attempt to humiliate had backfired spectacularly. He'd wanted dramatic television, but not at his own expense. "Time's up. Hands off your dishes," called the production assistant. The judging began with the other contestants. Some had done well, others had struggled, but all paled in comparison when Isadora presented her creation to the 3 judges: renowned chef and restaurateur Olympia Banks, food writer Jasper Hammond, and celebrity chef Pierce Thornfield. "This is Calibiac de Saumon with sauce Beauharnais," Isadora said simply as she set down her dish. The judges stared at the immaculate presentation. The pastry was golden and flaky, the layers within perfectly defined, the sauce glossy and aromatic. "This is museum quality," Olympia said, hesitating before cutting into it with her fork. "I almost don't want to disturb it." When she finally took a bite, her eyes widened. She set down her fork deliberately and looked directly at Isadora. "Who are you, really?" A hush fell over the set. The cameras zoomed in on Isadora, who maintained her composed demeanor. "My name is Isadora Matsuda now, after my recent marriage. Before that, I was known professionally as Isadora LeBlanc." A collective gasp rose from those who recognized the name. Pierce Thornfield, who had trained in France, actually stood up from his chair. "I ate at Lumiere 10 years ago," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "It was the meal of my life. Your quenelle de brochet was transcendent." Jasper Hammond, the food writer, looked stunned. "But you disappeared from the culinary scene. There were rumors you'd retired to a monastery or moved to Japan." "I did move to Japan," Isadora confirmed. "I married, stepped back from professional kitchens, and have been teaching private classes. My husband encouraged me to enter this competition as a way to reconnect with cooking professionally." Rodrigo, watching from the sidelines, looked as though he might faint. The production crew, sensing an unexpected narrative goldmine, were filming everything eagerly. "This Calibiac," Olympia continued, gesturing to the dish, "is possibly the finest example I've ever tasted. The pastry is impeccable. Thin, delicate layers that still maintain structural integrity. The filling is perfectly seasoned, the salmon cooked to ideal temperature despite being encased in pastry. It's beyond competition level," Pierce added. "This is world-class restaurant quality." The other contestants, rather than displaying jealousy, seemed mesmerized. They had just witnessed a master at work, the equivalent of weekend tennis players, suddenly finding themselves on court with Serena Williams. As the judges conferred, Valencia approached Isadora. Would you mind showing me how you got that pastry so flaky?" she asked tentatively. Before Isadora could respond, other contestants gathered around, full of questions and admiration rather than resentment. In that moment, the competition transformed into something closer to a master class. The production meeting following that day's shoot was unlike any Rodrigo had ever experienced. Network executives who rarely attended daily sessions had called in, their faces serious on the video conference screen. "This changes everything," said Viveka Hargrove, the network's head of programming. "We need to pivot immediately." Rodrigo squirmed uncomfortably. "I assure you, I had no idea who she really was." "It's brilliant," Viveka interrupted, surprising everyone. "Accidental genius, but genius nonetheless. The ratings potential is enormous. A hidden Michelin star chef competing against amateurs? The audience will eat it up." Lavinia, who had been frantically researching Isadora's background, spoke up. "There's more. After leaving Lumiere, she apparently spent time studying traditional Japanese cuisine. Her husband, Haruto Matsuda, is a master sushi chef who runs an appointment-only restaurant in Kyoto. They met when she went there to learn knife techniques. The story was becoming more compelling by the minute. The executives quickly decided to reshape the show's narrative, focusing on the remarkable presence of Isadora, while creating opportunities for the other contestants to learn from her expertise. Meanwhile, in the contestants' shared living quarters, Isadora found herself the center of attention. Rather than resenting her for her advantages, the others were eager to absorb whatever knowledge she was willing to share. "But why enter a competition like this?" asked Monty, genuinely curious. "You have nothing to prove." Isadora considered the question thoughtfully. "After my father passed away last year, I realized I'd lost my connection to the joy of cooking. It had become technical, perfect, but somehow empty. He was the one who taught me to cook in the first place. Simple, rustic French country dishes. This competition was a way to honor him, to remember why I fell in love with food to begin with." Valencia, who had been quietly listening, nodded in understanding. "So it wasn't about winning?" "Not at all," Isadora confirmed. "It was about rediscovering passion." The next morning, Rodrigo approached Isadora before filming began. His usual swagger was noticeably absent. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "I assigned you that dish hoping to create dramatic television. By watching me fail," Isadora finished for him, her voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Rodrigo had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yes, and I've been informed by the network that the show's format is changing, effective immediately." He explained the new direction. Isadora would remain a contestant, competing fairly, but each episode would now include a segment where she demonstrated a technique that all contestants could incorporate into their challenges. "They're calling it Masterclass with Isadora," he said, handing her the revised schedule. "The network believes it elevates the entire show from mere competition to educational content. They're already talking about cookbook deals and international distribution." Isadora accepted the schedule with a thoughtful expression. "And how do you feel about this change?" The question caught Rodrigo off guard. No one had asked about his feelings, certainly not the executives who had essentially demoted him from being the show's center of attention. "I'm adjusting," he admitted. 20 years in television production, and I've never been part of something with this potential. It's humbling." Isadora studied him for a moment. "Humility is essential in a kitchen. Without it, we never improve." As contestants and crew assembled for the day's filming, there was a palpable shift in energy. The cutthroat atmosphere had transformed into something more collaborative, though still competitive. Isadora stood beside Rodrigo as he announced the day's challenge, her presence lending an authenticity to the proceedings that had previously been missing. 6 weeks later, Culinary Champions had been transformed. Viewership had tripled, food critics were writing about the show, and culinary schools were assigning episodes as required viewing for their students. What had begun as a standard reality competition had evolved into a legitimate culinary education platform that still maintained the excitement of competition. Isadora's segments had become wildly popular, her calm demeanor and clear instruction making complex techniques accessible. More remarkably, the other contestants had risen to meet the higher standards she set. Valencia, who had never attempted French cuisine before the show, was now creating dishes that showcased classical techniques with her own Southwestern influences. Monty had discovered a talent for pastry that surprised everyone, including himself. The final episode's filming was approaching with Isadora, Valencia, and Monty as the remaining contestants. The night before the ultimate challenge, Rodrigo found Isadora alone in the kitchen, testing components for her final dish. "The network called today," he said, leaning against a counter. "They've green-lit 2 spin-off shows and want to renew this one with the new format. They're offering you your own series if you want it." Isadora smiled as she adjusted the heat under a simmering sauce. "And you? What will your role be?" "Executive producer, if I want it," he replied, though they've made it clear that Lavinia will have final say on all culinary matters. He paused, watching Isadora work. "I've learned more about food in these weeks than in 20 years of producing cooking shows. I used to think it was all just entertainment." "And now?" she asked, offering him a taste of her sauce on a spoon. He considered the complex flavors before answering. Now I understand it's about connection, to tradition, to each other, to something larger than ourselves. He set down the spoon. This sauce needs more acid. Maybe a touch of preserved lemon? Isadora's eyebrows rose in surprise. Very good, Rodrigo. You're developing a palate. The final challenge the next day was spectacular, with all three finalists creating menus that showcased both technical mastery and personal stories. In a twist that surprised viewers but felt right to everyone involved, the judges declared a three-way tie, the first in cooking competition history. Each of you has demonstrated excellence in different ways, Olympia announced. Rather than choose between different forms of perfection, we celebrate all three. As cameras captured the unusual ending, Isadora found herself surrounded by her fellow contestants, including those eliminated earlier, who had returned for the finale. What had begun as Rodrigo's attempt to create drama through humiliation had instead fostered a community of chefs supporting each other's growth. Later, as the production wrapped and the contestants said their goodbyes, Valencia approached Isadora, with tears in her eyes. Before this show, I was cooking to prove something, she admitted. To show my family that leaving law school wasn't a mistake, but you taught me to cook with love first, technique second. Monty joined them, his usual boisterousness subdued by genuine emotion. I've been offered an apprenticeship at Jasper's restaurant, he said, still sounding disbelieving. Me, the guy who could barely boil water 3 months ago. Isadora smiled at them both. The greatest joy in mastering any craft is sharing it with others who are eager to learn. Rodrigo, watching from a distance, realized that his mistake in casting Isadora had created something far more valuable than the dramatic reality TV he'd originally envisioned. In seeking to manufacture conflict, he had instead discovered authenticity. As Isadora prepared to leave the set for the last time, she found a small package in her station drawer. Inside was a worn, handwritten recipe card for Calibiac de Saumon, with a note from Rodrigo. Thank you for teaching me that real drama comes from passion, not conflict. Your father would be proud. Isadora tucked the card carefully into her knife roll, a tangible reminder that sometimes our greatest failures can unexpectedly lead to our most meaningful successes, whether in cooking, in television, or in life itself. As she walked out of the studio into the bright afternoon sunlight, Isadora felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure, uncomplicated joy of cooking simply for the love of it. Somewhere she was certain her father was smiling.